and welcome to my channel. It's been a while since I posted a video, but between life moving along and Shadowlands, I got really busy. But without further ado, let us get to this new World of Warcraft expansions review. As you might remember, my review of the new leveling redesign wasn't particularly complimenting, and so weren't my expectations about the Shadowlands systems. After almost 6 months of playing and a very drama-filled heroic progression, what's my take then of Shadowlands? Let us go with the easy one first. The art direction is, simply put, amazing as always. The voice acting is great, the music is stunning, although a touch less intrusive than that of most recent expansions, Looking at You, Desire. Each zone looks and feels different, although the usual charge that they are derivative can be levied to any and all World of Warcraft's content, and honestly, it's nothing new or unexpected. For the 1 to 50 leveling, I'll send you to my older video for the long story. Short version is that the new leveling redesign is definitely better than the previous incarnation, but still leaves a lot to be desired in terms of clarity of the storytelling. As for the new 50 to 60 leveling, complicated. For clarification, in case you didn't know, Shadowlands leveling works in 2 ways. The first time you level through it, you are forced to go through the main story campaign, a lengthy quest line that gets you naturally from 50 to 60, going through each of the zones and narrating a single overarching story, and ties the access to the endgame features such as covenants to its completion. On alts, though, you can skip the quest line and instead level via dungeons, world bonus and side quests in a fully freeform way in the Shadowlands zones via the Threads of Fate system. The ability to choose between the two on alts is a great addition, and I personally agree on the idea of pushing the story at least once. At the same time, Threads of Fate feels longer and somewhat unbalanced, especially when it comes to the bonus objectives. Some take 10 minutes and give a lot of XP, and some take half an hour for the same. That said, I've leveled plenty of alts via Threads of Fate, and it's still a great free way to do it. Hide on PvP, sorry. I can say though, for a long while at the start of the expansion, PvP was the fastest way to gear up characters, siphoning most of the player base into it in order to take advantage of the honor vendors and upgradable gear, which offered deterministic pieces and item level. But why? Weren't Mythic Plus dungeons the best and quickest way? Now, don't get me wrong, the Shadowlands dungeons are fine, although they received, especially after the MDI, some huge changes both in toning and sheer quantity of trash. They're just 8, 2 per zone, and vary wildly in difficulty and design, and while I have played them in Mythic Plus, I cannot say I've really dug onto them for a simple, obvious reason. The same reason most players turn to PvP to gear up. Up until 905, the rewards were paltry at best. You could chain those dungeons for hours without a single piece of decent gear dropping for you. After a couple of weeks of doing the 10 dungeons for the weekly vault, I simply end it all. Although, disclaimer, drops have significantly improved since, so do not let my experience turn you away from them. From a pure enjoyment value, I do have a weak spot for Mist of Turnascythe and the other side, with Necrotic Wake and Playful at the very bottom. Castle Nafria was played by drops nerf for most of the tier till 905 as well, and I was personally turned off from progressing it due to personal reason until recently. That said, the raid is, per se, standard Blizzard greatness. 10 fights, some with fun gimmicks, some more straightforward or prancing forward, and as always, amazing voice acting. The Narfius feels on all difficulties. I've tried in quite the epic fight, but even fights like Simons or Court of Blood have their clutch moments. Where do we start with Torghast? I was in the beta for the very latest period and never got to test it in its testing form, so I had no bias either way, and I have to say, I am amongst the crowd who got badly burned at the very start of the expansion regarding the feature. Terrible balancing, absurd swings in difficulty, no expected power level advertised, extreme RNG in terms of enemy powers and thus chances of success. On top of that, lengthy runs per each wing, which could do aforementioned RNG and with nothing. The whole thing was scuffed, and despite the changes made on the run and some more in 905, I avoided it as much as possible. I still do a few runs, depending on alts, per week, but nothing more than the strictly necessary to complete a side quest line or to catch a legendary for heroic progress alts. Torghast, as it stands, is at best boring, unbalanced, thematically depressing, and at worst frustrating. For me. Is it worse than Warfronts and Island Expeditions? For me, yes. Can it be improved and not dropped like those BFA features? Yes, with a redesign from the ground up. For the most part, Shadowlands doesn't really shake up the formula of Legion and Battle for Azeroth. The callings give more variety in the tasks, sometimes just asking for world quests, sometimes for a dungeon or world quests, sometimes for a Torghast run or a quick jump into the maw, but otherwise the world is mostly, functionally, the same, with the maw as an exception. The maw is one of the most underdeveloped areas of the expansion. The idea of timing the player's presence in the area, on top of an often questionable layout and an abundance of trash mobs, makes it an exercise in frustration, on top of a daily system that is far from a change from typical stuff we've seen for the last 16 years. To add insult to injury, the maw rewards are for the most part Torghast upgrades, or absurdly expensive RNG based rewards for the conduit system, more on that later, or if you really want to grind the place till the summer, gem sockets. I made a video about World of Warcraft suspension lock systems a few months ago that you can check here. What's the verdict for the Shadowlands based systems? Honestly, they go, for me, from frustrating again to outright pointless. The Covenants are meant to be a pick and forget choice, with the soul binds and the soul conduits being more involved in terms of active day-to-day or activity-to-activity choice making, and here the development team crashed at full speed against the usual wall. For most casual players, those choices are almost irrelevant. For the dedicated players, there's only one good choice and the rest is irrelevant. In the world of obsessive theory crafting, giving players the illusion of choice is a nice, but ultimately fruitless endeavor. People will either pick things relatively randomly or just copy-paste whichever build Icy Veins tells them is best. Given the amount of time these systems took to get prepped, iterated on, balanced and tweaked, it is honestly frustrating to think, again, that the expansion was delayed and likely 9.1 is also going to be released so late because of this. Let us not add all the mini-games and stuff related to the Covenants that is just an anima sync of little consequences, or the imbalance in reward scaling. Renown is a lot less key to the Covenant's features, given after the Thing Gate was over, accruing the needed renown is a lot easier and doable almost passively while playing normally the game, easing a lot to catch up. Overall, the expansion is good. It's not amazing. I am likely an old player now, but I can see the underlying structure of the game. The main plot is very bubbled from everything we've played in BFA, both in the campaign and, to a degree, even the side story of Torghast. There are references and old characters from previous expansions or even the RTS titles, but given those characters have been plenty relevant, their presence feels more like cameos for cameos' sake than for actual interest in them as characters. Zones are breathtaking, but in the end subjected to the same world quest treatment we've seen from Legion onwards. The dungeons are fine, some are funny, some are harder, but for the casual player it's less dungeons and less interesting dungeons than most of the roster of BFA or Legion. As said, I cannot talk about PvP. The raid is fine, but while aesthetics come down to taste and the fights feel epic and the mechanics are good, there is also an overall feeling of mechanical imbalance against the melee that, while it's always been the case in MMOs and in particular World of Warcraft, in some of these is just painful to watch. Seriously, ads unreachable without being ranged? The new features, the Maw and Torghast, feel boring or frustrating or both, and always half-baked. The Maw is small, likely terribly, and uninteresting to boot. The built-in timer kills the idea of exploration, forcing players to focus on the quickest and safest rewards instead of going out of their way to find rares, or treasures, or events, or the like. Torghast was terrible at launch, and the tweaks and changes in subsequent hotfixes helped, but ultimately the damage, at least for me, was done. The less time I spend there, the better, and weren't for my friends, I likely not even touch the place. The Cornons and all the power systems bound to them feel like an attempt to allow us to choose our class all, story view and looks, but in the end, do the sheer grind to achieve anything worthwhile in those sanctums, both in terms of features and cosmetics, not to mention the pointlessness of most of them. The whole thing ends up being very much sidelined, or a nice background in between dungeons or raid nights. Overall, Shadowlands gets a 7.5 out of 10, leaning towards an 8. It is great for a month or so, but short of halting, the content tends to volatilize at the second month mark. As of now, of course. It's a competent expansion, and given last year's difficulties and struggles, a half miracle that we came out just with 1 month of delay and in the good state it was in, but it definitely suffers from rushing and an honestly incomprehensible swing in overall direction from launch to now. Back at BlizzCon Online, we had a very little glimpse of World of Warcraft's next major content patch, Chains of Domination, which includes Corfia, a new zone added to the Maw with different mechanics, Tazavesh, the Veil Market, a dungeon centered around the brokers, and finally Sanctum of Domination, a raid which includes big names like Kel'Thuzad and, some would say, really finally, Sylvanas, together with changes and additions to how Torghast actually works. We can take for granted both dungeon and raid will be up to par with the standards we've used from Blizzard. They're well tested and tried features, so messing them up would be a challenge. The main question marks, features-wise, are the changes to Torghast and the new zone, Corfia. Considering this week we are seeing the first iteration of the PTR, most of these will be able to see to some degree on stream, hopefully, as I will be streaming again come next week, should everything go as planned, scheduled to be defined. Torghast needs a serious redesign from the ground up. More wings are nice, but ultimately the content is boring and unrewarding. We need more powers, more choice, and no ties to player power, or alternative ways to get the same power tied rewards elsewhere. The problems are bound both to the nature of the content and of the rewards. The WoW legendary system in Shadowlands is a huge point of frustration, and having it tied to a feature that is boring or frustrating as well only makes it a lot worse. The MO, from what little I've seen on PTR, is undergoing some major changes, but the main issue is the Eye of the Jailer, which makes anything beyond a few days in the zone extremely redundant, given the timer and the high risk little reward for the whole zone that feels vague, not to mention deeper reasons to dislike a zone that is basically styled around hell. As for the Jailer's Eye, we should be able to outright remove it and kill it in the patch, so maybe that's going to be solved by the plot, as it seemed to be the plan, going from the BlizzCon Online's presentation. My expectations for a release date? PTR started this week, and typically to my memory, PTRs for major patches last from 2 to 3 months, so we can expect 9.1 to be released at the very earliest in June, also randomly just as the ESO new chapter is out, but it's actually more likely a July release, likely late in the month. My own expectations, especially from a lore point of view for this patch, are high. The content drought is very much felt, and the continuous swings and changes on the live game, especially this late in the 9.0 patch cycle, are bordering on the ridiculous. Much and such as back during 8.3, so the game does need and deserve a lot of fresh air. The structure of Shadowlands as an expansion is solid, but the iterations and tweaks that it needs need to be working well and be plenty and bold. This is all for this video. As said, I'll be restarting streaming coming next week, scheduled to be defined, and Blizzard servers allowing the PTR. I hope to see you there soon, and as always, if you enjoyed this admittedly late take on Shadowlands, make sure to like and subscribe, check the Discord and Twitter for the latest updates. Stay safe.